Well, hello everyone. I hope that you're all having a great week and a great evening, and thank you so much for being here. So I'm just gonna get us started here and let some people trickle in while they still arrive. But yeah, I just wanted to say hello and welcome to today's Careers in EM virtual panel hosted by the International Association of Emergency Managers student chapter at the University of Delaware, or IAEM at UD. So my name is Sydney Dick, and I'm the current vice president of IAEM at UD. Julie Elliott's on here as well. She is my president, and I'm excited to be the facilitator for today's discussion. So we have a wonderful group of panelists joining us today. Before I introduce them, though, I just want to acknowledge that the field of emergency management is incredibly diverse, and the perspectives here today are just a small sampling and may not be representative of the field overall. But IAM at UD plans to expand this virtual panel into a series of panel discussions of more varied perspectives that represent other interests in the field. So, just some housekeeping items as well. Today's discussion will be recorded and then sent out to everyone who has registered. As we go throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop any questions you might have for our panelists in the chat. In your question, if it's directed at someone specifically, just feel free to mention that. Panelists, you're welcome to answer those as we go along, but also we can just wait for the designated Q&A time at the end of our pre-planned questions that we have for you. So thank you for joining us, and without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our panelists. So first we have Kristen Day. Kristen is the Disaster Resiliency Manager at United Way Worldwide. In her role with United Way, Kristen works to empower local United Ways to meet community needs after disasters. Prior to her work with United Way, Kristen conducted research through Disaster Research Center with Dr. A.R. Siders on subjects such as climate refugees, climate migration, federal adaptation law, and municipal wetland regulation. Kristen has a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations from the University of Delaware and is a U.S. Department of State Critical Language Study Scholar and a Congress Buddhist Youth Exchange Scholar. Thanks for being here today, Kristen. Next, we are joined by Ashley Morris. So Ashley is an emergency preparedness coordinator for Prince George's Office of Emergency Management in Maryland, and she is a certified emergency manager. Ashley is involved in training and exercise coordination, EOC readiness, and emergency operations support. Ashley has worked in local level emergency management in Maryland, Virginia, and Texas for over 6 years. Ashley is passionate about the intersection of meteorology and emergency management. Ashley has a master's in geography with an emphasis on natural hazards from Texas Tech University and is currently pursuing her PhD in emergency management administration from Oklahoma State University. We're so glad that you've joined us today, Ashley. And so next I'm moving on to Annie MacFest, who has had over a decade of experience in hazard mitigation, resilience, and emergency management. Annie is the mitigation and disaster planning lead at Freese & Nichols, a leading engineering and planning firm. She is also the president of the National Hazard Mitigation Association, and Annie serves as a subject matter expert to the Department of Homeland Security's CISA, Resilient Investment Planning and Development Working Group, where she provides guidance and best practice on resilient infrastructure and investment strategies. She is a certified floodplain manager and has deep experience in FEMA's community rating system, having helped the city of Tulsa achieve a Class 1 status in 2020, which is the highest possible rating for flood risk reduction and insurance discounts. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us, Annie. Okay, and then finally, we are joined by Josh Kelly, who is the Associate Director of Emergency Management at the University of Delaware. He's also an instructor at Eastern Kentucky University and formerly the Principal Planner at the Delaware Emergency Management Agency. Josh is a certified emergency manager and has worked for 9 federally declared disasters in his career thus far. Prior to his work in Delaware, Josh has worked as an emergency manager in Texas. Josh previously worked as a research assistant at both the Disaster Research Center and the University of North Texas. He received a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Delaware, where he majored in sociology and criminal justice, and his Master's of Public Administration with a concentration in emergency management is from the University of North Texas. Thanks for joining us, Josh. So, as you all can see, we have quite an array of experiences represented on this panel. We appreciate each of you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. So let's jump right into our questions for today. So for the first four, I'm going to read them off and I'll direct the question at one person, and then the other three panelists can answer. And then when we run out of ground on that, we'll move on to the next one. And then the last two questions, I'll just leave it up to all of you guys to put in your thoughts there and just let us know what you think. So the first question, our board of the student members of IAEM at UD, we're always interested to learn how individuals have found themselves pursuing a career in emergency management, and it's kind of like your professional origin story. So we're wondering if you can share with attendees today how you discovered and chose a career in emergency management and disaster management. So I was wondering if we could start with Kristen. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to learn from the other panelists. I'm a recent UD grad, so I graduated in 2022. So I'm 23, new to the field, new to this career as well. So my origin story is still in its development phase. But I actually saw an email from, I think it's Barbara Ford at UD. She sends out these mass emails with internships and research opportunities. And I saw one from Dr. Siders that she was looking for a research assistant to do legal research on federal adaptation law. And up until that point, I had done some like prior legal research connected to like cultural heritage, actually. And I was really interested in law. So I was like, okay, well, this is legal research. I'll just apply and see what happens. And that was kind of like my first stumbling into the world of like disaster management, and also policy as well. So that was my first project that I worked on, was related to federal adaptation law. And then that led to a summer scholars project about climate migration, which led to my senior thesis that was about climate refugees and international law. So again, it really took a legal perspective at first, but then it morphed a little bit more into understanding how we shape our environment and how the environment shapes us. So I take a really community focused approach to my work. So my experience isn't as technical, but that's kind of what led me to my role today.
So yeah, I can go. So my background, I started with an alternate spring break trip or an alternate winter break trip at UD. It was after Hurricane Katrina. I was looking for something to do for January, since we have off for that month. And there was a group of students who were going to New Orleans to help clean up after Katrina. Before that, I didn't know emergency management was a thing. So I went down there. I helped do muck and guts, clearing out houses, doing debris removal, that kind of stuff. And then when I came back, I took a class with Dr. Walkendorf, Disasters in Society. And then during that class, she asked if anybody wanted to be a research assistant for her. She was hiring research assistants. And so I just volunteered for that. And then it kind of just stumbles. Then I stumbled into going to grad school in North Texas. And then I transitioned from research over to the practitioner side after I did a lot of research with practitioners through grad school. So kind of by accident, I found the field interesting, rewarding, and then I ended up just getting into the practitioner side after grad school. So.
So for me, I always wanted to be a meteorologist my entire life. So ever since like I was 7, I was telling all my elementary teachers that I wanted to do meteorology, be a forecaster. Was super passionate about watching the Weather Channel, forecasting, but more specifically the weather safety aspect. And I was petrified of being on TV, so I never wanted to do news meteorology at all. So I was tracked to do National Weather Service, and I went to Texas Tech University, studied meteorology, did all of that, got into the graduate program for meteorology, still preparing to do NWS stuff. And we had quite a bit of different disasters during that 2010s to 2020 period. We had Joplin, we had the 2011 Alabama outbreak, a lot of really big, significant, severe weather. And I started thinking, like, my passion is forecasting and alerting and warning, but when you're in the NWS offices, once you draw the box, your job's done, right? You do preparedness, you do outreach, you put out the warnings, but then it's over. And I started thinking about, how can I have an opportunity to actually impact the field and save people from weather, which is, evacuations, providing storm sheltering, those things. And so during that moment, I actually switched from my atmospheric science master's program to the geography program so I could pick up natural hazards research, GIS stuff, and then did all of my thesis work in social vulnerability mapping, tornado resource access, and then graduated in 2016 and got straight into a local county doing emergency management, boots on the ground. And so it's very interesting because I have kind of that diverse STEM background, but I found out that like this is what I love to do. It's all about that weather safety stuff, public safety, and it was really a big dream come true to find that kind of opportunity to apply my passion in weather and safety.
Am I the last one? Okay, can y'all hear me okay? Good. Well, I guess I don't know if I'm older or not, but when I was in college, emergency management was not a thing quite yet academically. Until my junior year of college, my advisor at the time was starting the first emergency management minor program. I went to undergrad at Northwest Missouri State University, and I was studying to go be a school counselor is what I thought I might do. And my mom told me at the time if I was a school counselor, I wouldn't be able to buy my children shoes. And so I thought, well, what else am I going to do? And my advisor was a disaster psychologist, and she told me that she was starting this program and asked if I might want to assign that as my minor. And so I did. And so I was the first student to graduate from Northwest Missouri State University's what was then the Comprehensive Crisis Response program, and has now turned into a very well-known degree program for emergency management graduates. I didn't know what emergency management really was. I thought when I was going through the program, I was going to do a lot of response and operations, and it was going to be so cool. And one thing I think you might find out during the duration of this panel, depending on the questions, is that emergency managers do a lot of different things, and not a lot of them are as cool as response. A lot of them have to do with grants and planning and other types of things. So I graduated in 2010 and graduated on a Saturday, and that Monday I started working for the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency in hazard mitigation. That's often where a lot of females tend to end up in mitigation. At least back then, it was still very male dominated, very police fire. That's certainly evolved a lot over the last 13 years. But yeah, I've been drinking the Kool-Aid ever since, and I'm still here and really enjoying my career. I would not change a single bit of it. So happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. That's really interesting, and we love hearing your origin story. So thank you so much. All right. So the next question that I have for you all is thinking about your current position. What do you like the best about your job, and kind of what is the most satisfying part about your job? We'll start with Ashley this time.
Sure. So number one, I think I already had that passion for weather, and I get to kind of dabble in that every day, even though we're kind of in a boring dry pattern right now. But really, honestly, it's really rewarding. And I think that it's really important to keep in mind why we do this. And on a local level, emergency management application level, it's to help people. So I always feel like we're helping our residents, we're helping our taxpayers, we're educating people, we're providing services, and we're planning for that bad day so that we can protect people, save people, and it's all about the people. And so even if you're working long hours, or, I've had positions where I was grant funded, I might not get overtime, I might be, comp time paid, or I might have to make a lot of sacrifices working holidays or other things like that. I've never had a problem with it because I always feel just so happy that I can help people. So that's always kind of central to that community mission and that community giving back and knowing that you have purpose with what you're doing with your job.
I'll go next. So I'm in the private sector. I've spent about half of my career at state government, emergency management, first with the state of Nebraska and then with the state of Oklahoma. I was the state hazard mitigation officer for Oklahoma. I took that role during the midst of the recovery from the 2013 more tornadoes. And what I learned really quickly about the public sector versus the private sector, there's a role for everyone. It takes all of us, but being in the private sector allows me to be a little bit more resourceful in my position, just because I have different people at my fingertips. So when I was the state hazard mitigation officer working for state government, your budget is very small in most situations. There's never enough resources. You're often, as Ashley mentioned, relying on grant dollars to support the agencies. In the private sector, working at an engineering firm, our primary role is not emergency management. It's just an additional service that we provide. So, for example, something that I was just working on before this call was working with one of the largest municipalities in Texas to scope out a mitigation project that's about $90 million and figure out how to navigate that with not only making sure we're appropriately communicating with the public on the flood risk reduction, planning for if we can't get this project funded, on making sure the emergency plans are up to date, but then also planning for funding a $90 million flood risk reduction project from now until the year 2037 showed up on my screen. And I started thinking about how old I might be at that point in time. But it's just, I love working with an interdisciplinary team every day. I'm working with environmental scientists, climate modelers, emergency management experts, planners, you name it. And it's really rewarding to be able to bring the solutions, actually implement these solutions on the ground every day with these communities.
I can go next. One thing you'll find is at the higher level you go in emergency management, so if you go up to the federal level, down to the state, to the county, to the local, is you get more specialized as you go up. So now that I'm kind of at a quasi local level, one thing I really enjoy is the variety of projects I get to work on. So for me now, being a university emergency manager, I get to work our football games. So I get to go, play meteorologist at the football game. And then I work on our access and functional needs plans, work on the training and exercise side, work on our recovery side. I get to do kind of it all, which is really interesting and fun for me at the local level. And then as far as what's the thing that I think is most impactful, or the thing that I find the most satisfaction in the field, is, like Ashley said, helping people. So I spent the majority of my career on the recovery side. So I was the state public assistance officer for the state. I was a state coordinating officer during COVID for Delaware over our public assistance and mitigation programs. So one thing I found very satisfying was going out and doing damage assessments, and then being able to help those communities and come back months or years later and seeing those things rebuilt. It's something I definitely annoy my fiance with. We're out for dinner and I'm pointing out, like, hey, there's a pier that we helped rebuild, or there's there's riprap that we paid for. Stuff like that. So seeing something that's, talking to the community when they're down, when it's, one of the worst days, for them, and then being able to bring assistance to that community and then see them made whole on the recovery side is definitely a very satisfying part of the job.
Yeah, and I can jump in last. So I guess maybe I'll just start briefly with what United Way is, because I know a lot of people don't interact with it. But United Way is an organization that seeks to improve lives by mobilizing the caring power of communities around the world. And what that means is we are a network of over 1,000 local United Ways across the globe. We're in 37 countries, and we have about a little over 1,000 United Ways just in the US. And we actually cover close to 95% of the US geographically. And so when I think about like that scope and scale that we have, it kind of connects to one of my favorite parts of my role, which is being a connector and a convener amongst our network, but then also externally with partners being in the nonprofit space also with corporate partners, donors, connecting resources, information, so that we can prepare our local United Ways to, I don't know, be the best position they could be to respond to a disaster. And so like just an example of in the past year in this role, something that was really exciting and unusual is we had a corporate partner reach out to us because they wanted to participate in a volunteer project. So normally they have this like annual conference that was in Florida. Hurricane Ian had happened a couple of months before. They were in a position where they were still able to go, but they wanted to do some sort of volunteer project. So I was able to connect them with our local United Way, facilitate like the beginning of a project planning process for volunteers. And then a couple months later, I get an email from the CEO of that local United Way that relationship bloomed into a $500,000 gift to that local United Way, and they were able to open a disaster assistance center. So that just like makes my heart so warm when you can connect different pieces that helps to benefit communities who need those resources as they think about how to prepare long term, how to mitigate, because unfortunately, our United Ways weren't traditionally responding to disasters. We're known for working in areas like youth success, health, education, but as the frequency and intensity of disasters continues to increase, a lot of community partners and residents turn to United Ways after a disaster. And so I love being able to support our United Ways as they go on their own learning journey about what it means to respond to disasters. So long answer, but being a connector is how I would summarize it.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you all. That was really great to get to hear. And I think, especially as students, it's like it sounds like we have great things to look forward to. So that's very exciting. Thanks so much. So we'll pivot again to something a little interesting for students and just other people in the field to hear about. Kind of a tough question, especially when you're discussing emergency management. But we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what your work-life balance is like. And I thought we would start with Annie, if that's all right.
Sometimes I'm a victim of my own success, unfortunately, and I think we all run into this when we get to a certain point in our careers, but I will be curious what the other panelists say about this, but work-life balance is tough. It's definitely something you have to manage, but it doesn't always feel like work in the same way I think other professions make it feel like work. So if I'm working in an emergency operations center and I might be there 12 to 13 to 14 hours, running home, sleeping, going back when there's an event, you're not thinking necessarily the same way about what work-life balance is in that scenario compared to if you were working on, I don't know, going to big corporate meetings or something like that and just grinding on project deliverables. And so I think it just depends on what you're working on. I'm involved in a lot of additional organizations. So I'm the president of the National Hazard Mitigation Association. I do a lot of volunteer work, just trying to educate other people and get the profession continuing down a path of moving forward momentum. And so that contributes to my lack of work-life balance. But with any job, you can ask this question, and it's all about how you learn to prioritize your day-to-day tasks and what's really on fire, what's really emergent versus what you just think might be causing you anxieties and grief during the day. And certainly it's something that your first year out of school and in the professional world is a lot more difficult to navigate for yourself than, year 5, 10 to 15. So that's, I guess, I don't have a work-life balance. My 6-year-old is running around behind us, as if anybody heard that, but it's all good. It's all great, very rewarding work.
I can jump in after. I would say my work-life balance, I'm laughing because it's a constant dance, I feel like. And I've had to identify like what small things I can do on a daily basis to help me like reset, get in a good mindset for the day. And so just like a dorky example is I try to go on like a little bike ride every morning before I start work, and it just helps me decompress. But I would say like for my role specifically, and I would encourage people as you consider a career in emergency management, is look at what your colleagues or teammates are doing to identify like if you're part of a team that also will have similar struggles with their work-life balance, and or you're able to lean on each other in terms of like priorities shift. And so if you have something going on in your personal life that you're not able to attend to a work matter that's kind of like outside of your normal hours, being able to lean on them. Because just transparently, I'm the only person at United Way Worldwide with disaster in my title. And we have as large of a footprint as we do. And so that's often made it challenging to set those boundaries because everything can start to feel like it is a fire. And so outside of just having those key small things that you do for yourself to keep yourself healthy, mentally, physically, spiritually, I would say also being able to socialize that with your colleagues is really important.
I can go next. But my first practitioner boss had a great boss, and she was very adamant about work-life balance, just understanding the kind of ebbs and flows of the profession. So when we had our blue sky days, when we had our nice days, she would be like, all right, we're going to go do yoga as a department. And so we would do that for like our lunch or extended lunch or, whatever, just to relax and de-stress during the blue sky days, knowing that there are going to be gray sky days. There are going to be the days where you're working 12, 14 hours a day. So then, being defensible about your positive days and your time off, basically to try to avoid burnout as much as possible. I think is really important in our field, avoiding scope creep wherever possible, which might be harder when you're new into the field. But for me, I'm 10, 15 years in, I have director in my title. There's a lot of people who don't understand what emergency management is. So anything safety related or anything remotely, related in that realm, they might try to push to your department or push to us for us to take on as a task. And, it can be death by a million cuts sometimes. So if you're trying to get assigned, hey, oh, emergency management can handle this thing, I'm very defensible about what we can manage and what we can take on in our office, which is just me and whatever interns I can kind of, cobble together at a particular time. And I'm very fortunate now that I'm at a university because unlike any, state, county, local government I've worked for, we have ebbs and flows. We have the summer season where our population is suddenly not on campus. And so we go from having 35,000 people that we're in charge of to having 1,000 people, or something like that. So we do have some ebbs and flows where a lot of other agencies might not have that. But at the state level, local level, when I work that, it's very, very difficult, and you have to be deliberate about your work-life balance, taking your time off, putting your phone away, saying no to things, so you don't end up burning yourself out or burning your team out or whatever.
Yeah, so I really like how Josh was talking about ebb and flow because that's 100% how I feel like it is. I've experienced working in one-man shop, so you're the only emergency manager for the entire jurisdiction, and I also have experience now working with 15 to 20 people in an office of emergency management. It's a lot different. So depending on what your balance really requires, I think that looking at the staffing of the office is really important because if you are in that local level one spot, everything's you. Any emergency's you. If you have an activation at any time, it's you. You have to come back from vacation, things like that. So I think it is really important to learn how to balance your blue sky and your gray sky, just like everybody else said, whether you're in that one man or you're not. Blue sky, it's 8 to 5, pretty balanced. The only thing that you might do that's a little extra is like your community engagement, your outreach events. Those are going to be evening, CERT. That's a really great program to put on for your community, weekends, stuff like that. And then gray sky obviously is your 12-hour day. Could be longer or could be less depending on your staffing, but you're really going at that time. So it's very stressful. It's different work, like they were mentioning. So your stress level and how you're managing your basic needs during an EOC activation or a disaster management session is a lot different, and it requires different kinds of self-care and different kinds of balance. And I think that was probably one of the hardest things for me to learn, because I'm very go, go, go every day too. And I didn't realize that it's really important for me to really set what that routine looks like and maintain that routine, even when you get into that hurricane ramp up or that response and things like that. I learned the hard way doing deployments and stuff with the IMT, like eating, making sure you take breaks in the EOC to eat, or take a break and have a snack, or drink water, or just step out and make a call. All those things I think are really important to have a plan ahead of time on how you can handle that, and make sure to emphasize it, because you will absolutely burn out, especially if you're doing a deployment, an activation, or anything else like that. And then I do want to just echo seasons. So when I first started my job, I was really into fitness and routines and all this stuff. And I've learned that I have to be kind of careful on myself, or I have to be forgiving when my job calls for me to have to change some of that. We have seasons. Some seasons I'm absolutely 100% balanced. I'm hitting my gym routine every day and things like that. Other seasons, I have to maybe adjust a little bit and still maintain those self needs, but I might not be able to do my 2 hour walk or whatever. So I think it's just important to know that you have to be able to be flexible, and then you also have to really just know how you're going to balance all of that and do what's good for you. Not everybody has the same need for rest time, work time, and other things. Make sure you understand what you need, and then set that expectation and work for a place that supports what you need.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, guys. Those are really good insights and very helpful things to keep in mind. Okay, so another question here that we have for you, in thinking about the future of emergency management and your professional role, what keeps you up at night? What are your concerns? We're gonna start with Josh. Josh, what keeps you up at night?
A lot of things. So I'm reading the book Leave the World Behind right now, so that might be why I'm thinking this way. And also, it's been very topical with FEMA. But it's cyber threats. So as time goes on, emergency management picks up more and more things. I think it can be a curse of our success. So things that we might not be the primary lead on, like pandemic response, accepting refugees, cyber, these things, we are now getting pushed to the forefront a lot of times. And like everybody else, especially after the pandemic, a lot of our work styles have shifted. So a lot of our departments are hybrid, virtual EOCs, which were not a thing when I started in emergency management. FEMA is very virtual damage assessments are a thing. So if we were impacted by a major cyber incident at the same time as like a natural hazards threat or something, a lot of our work is virtual based. So do we have the ability to do our jobs the old-fashioned way if our systems are taken down, if we lose our fancy web EOC systems, our virtual systems, FEMA's grant systems are all virtual. So would we lose the ability to do our job and help the people the way that we are used to helping them if we get impacted by a massive cyber incident or something like that?
Now I'm gonna be staying up at night thinking about that. So thank you. I can add that to the list of nightly anxieties. I guess coming from a nonprofit perspective, something that keeps me up at night is donor fatigue and donor apathy towards funding disaster response and what that cycle looks like. And I'll have to go back and maybe find this research, but I saw recently that I want to say it's up to 80% of disaster response funds are earmarked within the first 6 weeks. Do not quote me on that, but I think it goes to show the unsustainable cycle of private funding in the disaster philanthropy world. And I know a lot of our local United Ways and their partner organizations in local communities are trying to find the right balance in how they communicate with donors around what they want to fund because a lot of times, and United Ways are unique in the fact that they're in their communities 365 days a year. And then there's a lot of organizations that come into those communities after disaster, and it's all hands on deck for, immediate relief. But United Ways, I feel like, are uniquely positioned to do mid and long-term recovery from a community perspective. And so what keeps me up at night is, how do you create a sustainable funding cycle for that type of work for nonprofits? And just a plug, if you're interested in reading more about this or learning more about it, the Center for Disaster Philanthropy has really great resources available, and they work to educate donors on how to break that cycle. But that's something that is currently keeping me up at night.
I think for me, I'm going to take it from a field perspective. Something I've learned working in multiple states, local level, is that we still struggle with defining what emergency management is as a profession, as well as what we're looking for to hire, what's entry, what's pay, what's staff numbers, especially in those counties that are really high population and have 1 to 2 emergency managers to take care of all the responsibility, and training standards and just stuff like that. We have been growing a lot, which is great. And I think that we're becoming more and more relevant, but we have struggled as a field to really define what that looks like. What kind of education do we require of emergency managers? What kind of classes? What kind of background? Are we taking first response background of people out of first response? Are we taking college graduates? How can you get into the field? How can you get a mentor? How can you promote? Do you have 10 years of experience and you're still losing promotions to maybe a retired first responder who has a different background than you? Things like that. And I really seriously feel like if we really want to be able to take care and grow as a field, we have to take the time to define that. Have a clear path for students to get in, have a clear pathway to promote, ensure that we're not understaffed. That's one of the biggest struggles. And another thing too, just emphasizing on local level, like we need training, we need people to take the trainings, because we are in charge of a lot of money, a lot of responsibility, and the entire disaster process starts at the local level. And we have a lot of emergency managers or a lot of different hiring processes that kind of flirt with that a little bit in terms of just not having the standards and not having people that have that training to do what we need to do to save people. So I think that's kind of my biggest fear, and I think we're getting better at it, but I really hope that we work together with IAEM or even EMI and different associations and stuff to really define what a career in emergency management looks like.
Kind of echoing a little bit what Ashley mentioned and defining what emergency management looks like. When I mentioned that when I started this, I thought I might be in response, and I thought that's what emergency management was. And we're nearing a point where we need to shift some things away from emergency management, if I'm being honest with y'all, and just give it to the people that it seems to fit better with. We're expecting emergency managers to be the doers of all the things. And sometimes what that means is a good emergency manager will coordinate with the experts within their communities and make sure that the planners are planning and the engineers are engineering. But sometimes what an emergency manager hears, if they don't have additional resources, is that mitigation is theirs, response is theirs, recovery is theirs. And a lot of times when an emergency manager doesn't have a lot of the capabilities and a lot of the capacity, they might focus on the thing that typically interests them the most. And most often that's response. We don't have a response issue in this nation. We respond to disasters really well. We have a recovery issue. We have a resilience issue. We have a mitigation issue. We have an adaptation issue. And us continuing to invest, plan for the response, without really taking planning beforehand for the actual hazards that we can most oftentimes, at least for the smaller events, reduce the risk of, things like building codes, just adequate design standards, things that are just holistically innate to these communities. It frustrates me and it keeps me up at night because it's going to impact your kids, it's going to impact my kids, it's going to impact all of us. So just keeping in mind that emergency management, yes, a good portion of it has to be response, but we have to have the people that have the passion for the rest of it. long-term recovery planning and emergency management is typically getting people back to exactly how they were. We are rarely planning for long-term recovery in communities to rebuild better than we found them. So that's my soapbox for the moment.
Yes, we're happy to platform the soapbox, and we understand the grievances and whatnot. Yes. Well, thanks so much, guys. Okay. So the next two questions that I have are a little bit more like general advice and everything. And I'm not going to direct it to one person to start off with, so just feel free to jump in. But imagine that you could go back in time and be a student again. What skills would you want to acquire?
This might seem so basic, but I cannot emphasize it enough. I feel like as a student, we would hear the words group project and like truly moan. But I would say any type of class or experience where it's an ultra collaborative environment would definitely be a place I would find myself showing up. I feel like oftentimes, at least in my role, I'm interacting with so many people, whether it's like your set, internal response team, plus external partners, whoever that like, changing group of people might be. And it's always great practice to interact with different personalities, different backgrounds, different perspectives on issues, whatever that looks like in a classroom setting. I would highly recommend. And I would say it doesn't even have to be disaster focused. I would say in any course, but any collaborative learning environments, I would definitely encourage you to step into.
I'll echo that. I literally almost dropped the class that I got involved into emergency management because it was with Dr. Walkendorf, and I showed up for the first day, and it was a night class, and she was like, every single week is a group presentation, and I was like, every week I have to present in this class with a group, and we got stuck with a group, and that was your group the entire semester. And luckily, I had a great group, but then once I got into the field and started working professionally, I was like, that was a really good, you know precursor for the actual work environment. And everybody hates group projects as a student. I give this to my students now, and it's like there's one person who doesn't do anything. They send an email at 11:59, at midnight. There's some superstar students, there's average people. They all graduate and they all become your coworkers, in the future. And especially in emergency management, when we're in kind of the relationship coordination business, like Kristen said, that's so important to develop those soft skills to be able to navigate that. You might be a superstar yourself, but you have to be able to work with a variety of people. And then for my own answer, this is coming from Julie. Kind of put me to shame. She worked with our office, and she's really good at design. And so she redesigned a lot of our outreach like materials. And it's something I'm really bad at. I'm just not very naturally artistic. So I wish that I would have taken like a graphic design class or developed those skills when I was younger, when I was in school. Because you can put together great plans, great procedures, great community outreach materials, but if you can't package it in a professional or flashy way, it definitely takes away from the legitimacy of your documents when you're distributing that to the public. For me, giving that out to our student population or coworkers and stuff. So having the ability to produce, slick graphic design stuff would be a skill I would love to have.
I would highly suggest that you take a Microsoft Word class and learn how to develop Microsoft Word templates, how to format things, how to write a letter. You'd be amazed how much you might take for granted on your professors being very meticulous about your grammar, your spelling, however you're writing, your writing styles, what type of voice you're using when you're writing. Those things are incredibly important. When I'm looking at hiring somebody, I rarely will prioritize an emergency management background over somebody that's well written and that's well spoken and that has just a passion for something. More emergency managers locally here in Oklahoma that aren't even clients of mine, that are just long-term friends, will call me and say, I'm going to send you a letter. Can you rewrite it for me? And I spend a lot of time doing that for grown adults. It's very important. And the other one is GIS. If you're not taking a GIS class, get in one, get a certificate. If you can write and you can do your own GIS, you can write a plan. Excel, any sort of accounting, just pretend you're going into like some sort of, you're going to go open your own business or something, basically, because you have to know how to do basically everything: budgeting, leadership training. So don't just think about the classes that are emergency management focused. Yes, those are important, but we can teach you all of that. The other things are not as easy to teach.
Yeah, so I would echo that too. Obviously, number one is if you can do STEM, meteorology, geosciences, cyber, technology, any certain hazard, and get any kind of classes in that, I think that gives you a benefit to better understanding the science and how hazards work to help drive those plans and help drive your understanding. Personally, I use my weather forecasting every single time we have any kind of weather. I do all the weather briefings, and I feel like we have kind of a little bit of a advantage being able to make decisions in the office with someone who understands the models and everything else like that. And there's not a lot of people who have that. So that's one way to kind of set yourself apart. I would second the GIS because I did the GIS as well. And honestly, it took me a while to get into an entry-level job. I applied many places and I didn't get a job for a while. Place that hired me, though, saw my GIS and had a GIS grant project for hazmat mapping or something. And it literally got me in the door to emergency management. So definitely GIS. Anything technology, because like they were kind of mentioning, we do have a lot of folks that don't have a lot of tech experience. And so if you're good at coding or technology or apps, or maybe AI, or maybe anything you can bring in the field and make the job easier, that's going to make you look good too, because a lot of folks who've been in emergency management for years and years and years might not have that. And then lastly, I will say personally, I did not have any kind of first response background, and I did not think I really needed one until I got out there and realized that honestly, a lot of people expect you to, or think you do, or will not give you a job unless you have some kind of understanding of that. And so I always recommend either volunteering somewhere, making some first response friends, maybe giving some time to your local volunteer firehouse, just so you can speak the language and then also have that as a part of your background. Like I said, we're still trying to set the standards, and so not every region hires based on whether or not you're a first responder or not, but I do personally feel like some places do look for that. So that would give you an advantage for folks that feel like you need to have that background to be able to work with police, fire, and EMS to do the job that we do every day.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. I know what classes I guess I'm going to be auditing next semester, even though I'm a sociologist. I'm going to be up in those GIS classes. So great. Thank you. Okay. And so our final pre-planned question that we have here, and once again, feel free to jump in. Other than those skills that you just spoke to, if any of our attendees decided to pursue a career path similar to yours, what advice would you give to them?
I'll start. I would just suggest recognizing that what you think you might want to do might not be where you end up, that you might find something totally different once you begin, and that's okay. It's always okay to start over. It's always okay to try something and say that you didn't like that or it wasn't what you thought it might be. That's always okay, regardless of the profession. But when you're going into this profession, I'm always very surprised when I hear that people cannot find positions in emergency management, because we are so in need of people everywhere. Everyone's hiring. And so if you're struggling to find a position, especially as you're graduating, don't hesitate to reach out to leaders at companies. Don't hesitate to reach out to the state director of emergency management and say, I am looking for a job. Don't hesitate to reach out to a local director and just build a network. That's the most important thing that I can express to anyone getting into any profession, but especially in emergency management, is build yourself a network. If you find that network, one, you'll never find yourself unemployed, and two, you'll always have a resource when you need one.
I guess I can go. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Oh, all right. Mine's basically just the same: network. So get out of the classroom, go volunteer at an exercise, go meet your local emergency manager, and try different things out, take an internship at, as many as you can, at a variety of different offices, because there's such different paths and there's such a variety of jobs that you can do. Like I forget who said it earlier about getting a lot of responders who come into the field. And I've hired a lot of people who think, hey, I'm going to be, out there individually doing debris cleanup or building a house or something like that. Well, we hired you in the rep section. That was what was available. So now you're doing radiological, emergency planning. So there's such a variety of different things that you can do. And you might not like the grant side. You might like doing outreach or training and exercise or something like that. So, volunteer at local exercises, volunteer with local organizations, meet your local emergency managers, intern where you can, and just build up your network, even with your students. So if you're not a member of the IAEM chapter, join the IAEM chapter, because the people I talked about in Dr. Walkendorf's class, we all graduated together. Now, 15 years later, we're all still working together in various different forms, because the field is still pretty close knit and pretty small. So your classmates will be your future peers, and the people you meet today will be your future peers as well.
Yeah, so I just think that you really need to have the mentality to explore it all. And so personally, when I worked in an office that was only 1 or 2 people, you get to do it all. You do emergency planning, you do training, you do exercise, you do outreach, you do alert systems, literally all of it. And I personally feel like when you have an opportunity to do all of that, you can learn exactly what you like. If you like T&E, training and exercise, you could do that. If you like planning, outreach, all of those things. And then you can consider specializing in that. Maybe you go on a state position in a division like that, or even a bigger office like I currently work, where you're kind of stuck in that planning division or whatever. Definitely explore early and take your training early. Like I mentioned, we don't really have a lot of training standards, so people kind of just take training when they want to. There's a huge advantage to going and knocking out all your classes, especially too if you get hired. Take all your classes. Take your ICS 300, 400 right away. Take PIO, take public information, take social media, take as much as possible, because it's going to expand what you know, and it's honestly going to give you an advantage over other folks that might not have any training. Lastly, I would say too, just cross sector. Learn if you like local government, state government, federal government, public sector, or maybe you like private sector. Maybe you like consulting, where you're writing plans for governments and stuff like that. Maybe you also like private, like business continuity side of things. I actually have a friend who just got the Wawa job. So he is now the continuity emergency manager for Wawa, like the entire nation. And I think that that's just like the coolest thing ever. But you won't know what you're going to like and what you can try unless you test it out. And you have to be willing to kind of move around and try different positions and learn. And then one other thing, associations. So be involved in IAEM, join your membership, go to conference, do stuff like this, webinars, social media. Ton of really great emergency managers are on social media that if you just ping them, DM them, they would love to have a call with you, mentor you, anything like that. So I think all of those will give you an advantage in learning what you want to do, but also help you along your journey of getting where you want to be.
And I'll just echo that last part about thinking like cross sectorally about where you can be engaged. And I don't know if I made that word up or not. I think I did. But even to like what I would say again from a community perspective is just go out into your community to get involved, especially through volunteering, because you'll have such a better understanding of assets and gaps in that community. For example, if you learn through volunteering at maybe like a domestic violence shelter, for example, that might be a challenge in your community, and those vulnerabilities are exacerbated by disasters, right? So there is this connectivity there, but it might not be the first thing that comes to mind. And just along with that, and I promise I'm not being paid to promote this at all, but the United Way of Delaware is located in Wilmington, and on their site they have volunteer opportunities with all their partner organizations and things like that. So just a good resource if you're like, I don't even know where to volunteer. That might be something you could look at. And then I guess secondly, in terms of what advice I would give, oftentimes I am significantly younger than the people that I work with. And there's definitely a little bit of imposter syndrome around that. So outside of always looking for growth opportunities, whether that's through um, networking, skills development, etc., I read this book earlier this year called Fight by John Della Volpe. And in it, essentially, he talks about each generation and their unique strengths and weaknesses. And what I really would encourage you to lean into, and this goes back to what Ashley was saying earlier, is, you know, as being part of a younger generation, what are the skills that you could develop that would be a unique value add to your workplace? So is it GIS? Is it something else? But I just encourage you to reflect on that, because I just think it's something to bring to the table, and something that maybe other generations don't have. So that would be my second piece of advice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's really great advice. And I think that we have all learned a lot just from those things in general and everything else that's been going on. A few people have been dropping some questions in the chat, which is awesome. And I'm seeing lots of links. I'm saving them myself. I know that. So yeah, at this time, we're gonna welcome anyone who has any questions to feel free. You can unmute yourself and just share it if you would like. You can also put it in the chat. We do have a few questions that were asked previously. I'll just draw our panel's attention to those first of all. So when we were talking about GIS and whatnot, where did it go? Yeah, Melody asked, what about Python and machine learning as skills to have? Are those kind of valuable things that you see people looking for in hiring and within emergency management?
I can maybe say on the private sector side, yes, depending on what you're doing. Again, working at an engineering firm, we have modelers that are using Python script, and we have an entire group now looking at just AI technologies and seeing how we're going to deploy them. One of the cool things about what we do at an engineering firm, and there's many engineering firms out there that do that similar, but FEMA headquarters, and FEMA is actually a direct client of mine. So the different technologies that we deploy are being utilized and requested by the federal government. So a lot of the things that you see in terms of FEMA mapping or different types of solutions that are out there, it's the private sector that's behind the scenes doing that. The National Risk Index is a good example of this, some of those other tools and technologies. So as much as you can get into the tech side, I think that's the future for all of us. I think some of us are going to find ourselves in an interesting space 20, 30 years from now if we don't have those types of skills and if we don't continue to grow with them.
I would just add to say that I don't even think we're really thinking about AI, even though we should. And I would say we do not utilize technology and modeling and data nearly as much as we should. And so I think there's an advantage as long as you can kind of do the framework on how you can apply it and then propose that to them, because we're not currently using it. But if you know all about it and you can think of a cooler way and a faster way to do it, and you propose that in a job interview or as an asset, I mean, you probably could get yourself a job pretty quickly doing that. So that's my recommendation, is kind of pre-packaging those skills and applying it in a way where someone who's never heard of AI or doesn't know how to use it would be able to do it.
An example of that I used when I first started as a practitioner was ReadyWarn, where it's like an automated social media posting of the National Weather Service's alerts on your social media. And like we've talked about with the generational differences in emergency management, a lot of the leadership positions can be from a different generation, or they've spent their career in something else and have transitioned over. So building your tools and being able to demonstrate value. So before we used it at the state, we had our PAOs who were waking up in the middle of the night to post on social media about, hey, there's a tornado warning or there's a severe weather warning. So I was aware of this product, automated alerts, and I pitched it to our director, and we got it implemented. And then I think I won like an award for it, but it's something so stupid and so simple for me that I was like, oh, it just makes sense. It's $15 a month. It automatically posts it, but that had never been thought of. So building up those tools and being able to demonstrate value to your leadership or to the people who might have a different background than you can be very, very helpful, especially early on in your career.
Great. Okay. Another question that we had in the chat. I see that Ashley just gave a response here, but I'm wondering if anyone else has any thoughts on it. But Andrew asked, how often does education of others play a role in your jobs?
I guess I'll add to this one. I do a lot of hiring, and it's interesting because this might be opposite of the panelists, but I often don't hire those with an emergency management background unless they bring another skill set in. So, for example, I have more frequently hired an undergraduate in meteorology than I have an emergency manager to do disaster planning because of the technical portion that they bring to that. So it really depends. Recently, Oklahoma's been looking for a new state director, and I was really surprised that the educational requirement was 2 years of experience and a bachelor's degree. I would hire somebody without a bachelor's degree, without a master's degree. For me, even I have 2 master's degrees. It's such the least important thing that I personally take on when I'm hiring somebody, just because there's so much more that goes into a person and their ability to do a job. So if you're currently in an emergency management undergrad program, consider, if you're going to a master's, maybe consider doing something that's not emergency management focused, or the opposite of that. Not every single person's going to have my same opinion, but it's just something that I've observed over the years as I've gotten into my 10th year of being a manager and hiring people. I've just found myself staying more on the line of, I need the experience of somebody that can more function independently as they jump on, rather than somebody with a bunch of degrees after their name that can come in and I have to still train them a lot.
Yeah, I think it definitely plays a role in terms of, from my perspective, people being educated on what emergency management is, what your duties are, how you're being hired, and other things like that. I agree with what she was saying too. I think that it depends on where you're at and what they're looking for, basically.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So Julie has another question here. I see Ashley provided a response too, which is great, but just if anyone else has thoughts at all, Julie asked, for those of you who have changed sectors, any advice for shifting your emergency management career from one sector to another?
I think Annie talked about it earlier, but about being the ability to write. So I transitioned from research to emergency management. So you never know what skills are applicable to one or the other. And one of my first jobs, they told me I got, had no practitioner experience. It was a very competitive job market at the time in North Texas. And they interviewed me because I had a bunch of publications from research. And they're like, oh, so you have the ability to write. And that was one of the things that got my foot in the door. So I would say try to find the applicable skill sets, and then, like we've been talking about, just building up your toolbox with as many marketable skills and things in addition to your degree, in addition to your volunteer experience or your work experience, so that your CV or resume can demonstrate value to your, the hiring manager who's going to be looking at it.
And the private sector is not for everyone. I personally am only in the private sector because where I am located, where my home is located, it's tough. Everything has its challenges, but the private sector, you're working on contracts and billable hours, whereas you don't have to pay attention the same type of way when you're in the public sector. So it's just a little bit different. There's also somewhat of a stigma associated with certain private sector positions from the consulting side at times. So it just depends on where you find your heart being, quite honestly. Some people love the flexibility of the private sector versus the public sector. State government, in my opinion, is the absolute sweet spot of our profession. I think you have the most opportunities to make change in the world. When you're at the federal government level, you're kind of shackled like this. They can only do so much, and your mission area gets really small. And then locally, you're almost just that much more broad, and you don't have as much of a voice up federally in comparison. So it just really depends. But jumping around is just fine until you find some position that really satisfies what you're looking for.
And I haven't switched at all, but just speaking to the nonprofit sector, there's a lot of opportunity, I feel like, to work on really unique projects that pop up because of a disaster that happens. So maybe like more so in the recovery space. And you can combine a lot of interests that maybe you wouldn't be able to otherwise. So whether that's housing, whether that's transportation, whether it's, I don't know, youth success and continuity of access to like educational facilities or student success, mental health, right? So there's kind of that ability to maybe find and triangulate multiple interests. But along with that, something that does come with the nonprofit sector is unless the organization is specifically disaster focused, most of the time these positions are grant funded. So there could be a little bit of instability in terms of like career continuity. So opportunities and drawbacks.
For sure. Well, thanks so much. That's great. Andrew has another question here. Andrew asks, any advice for someone who wanted to get into environmental or ecosystem emergency management or disaster management?
Advice, it depends on what you mean by environmental or ecosystem emergency management or disaster management, whether that's like the hazardous materials types of environmental, or you're actually looking at environmental like the EPA, water, wastewater, water quality. I think just look at the job you want and look at the people that has or look at the background of the person that has the type of position you want, and potentially reach out and ask them how they got involved, or to connect you into an organization that they've found helpful to them. Again, if you are starting out in emergency management, you're all on the right path. From there, it's just kind of that next step to connect you to the right person who can help you find the right place.
Okay.
Sorry, one more add. I see your comment, Andrew, mainly focusing on environmental and natural disasters. One group that would potentially be interesting is the executive director of ASAP, which I think is the Association of maybe Sustainability and Adaptation Professionals, but their executive director got her start actually in response to the BP oil spill, and has worked a tremendous amount of disasters. If you connect with me, I can connect you to her, and that might be a starting point for you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Just for the sake of the recording, we did have some people asking about how to get into federal emergency management, and it looks like pretty much everyone responded with kind of ideas and whatnot, including reaching out to people who already work at FEMA, getting involved with their reservist program, and the links to everything that is being shared will be included in a follow-up email later on, so that will be there as well. Moving on to another question here. From John. John is asking advice for soon-to-be graduates on how to leverage internships in EM and where to find jobs.
I recently was clearing out like one of my old computers where when I was like, I had a bunch of stuff on there from when I was like searching for jobs, and I literally created a spreadsheet of, hey, here are the agencies I want to work for. I'm a big family person, so I wanted to work in Delaware. So I looked up all the different emergency management agencies, and I set alerts for their job boards. And then I reached out to a county emergency manager in Newcastle County, and I asked him about internships. So then I interned there, ended up leveraging those networks to help get my job at DEMA. So if you're interested in a specific geographic area, I would say look up those emergency management agencies. Check out their job boards, set alerts if you can, reach out to their emergency managers, ask them about openings, positions, things like that. There's a couple job boards I posted. So the IAEM has a job board that's pretty active. Government Jobs has a very active job board. I got my current job through LinkedIn. I just saw it was posted one day, and I was like, oh, and which is very unusual in Delaware. We only have 4 local emergency management offices, and we have very few local level emergency managers. And I happened just to see it on LinkedIn, which I've always used kind of as like a passive resume, passive networking tool. So get on LinkedIn, get on those boards, find jobs you're interested in or geographic agencies that you're interested in, and try to build up those networks.
So I got my job at the state of Nebraska and then my initial job at the state of Oklahoma by emailing the director. I emailed the Nebraska director and just said, hi, I'm Annie. I'm graduating with my degree in emergency management. These are some, certifications I have. And it was all my like FEMA courses. And he brought me in for an interview and he hired me on, and I started immediately. And then when I was moving to Oklahoma, I emailed the state director, said, hi, I'm Annie. I have a year of experience at Nebraska. I'm moving to Oklahoma. And he hired me on. And that wasn't because I'm some superstar. I was, 21 and 22 years old at the time. It was because state government often has the ability to hire additional people. So local government, depending on where you are, they might just have 1 or 2 positions at the municipal level or the county level. State government has a lot of flexibility to be able to bring people on. It might not be a full-time permanent position, but it might be a foot in the door.
Yeah, I totally want to echo all of that. Where I went to school in West Texas, and so that's fairly rural outside of like Lubbock and Midland, which is like 3 hours away. So super blessed to be up here where there's a lot more different regions and urban areas. But for me, I basically applied everywhere. And I had a mindset that I wanted to start a career. I was willing to take entry anywhere. So I applied from state of Washington to Texas to Oregon to out here in DC and all sorts of things until I got something. And I totally echo the grant aspect, as I think a majority of my local level positions have been grant. And while grant doesn't always sound great, they can be secure in certain areas. And the way that you can look at it also is you kind of have to get a foot in the door so you have something. So even if it's a 1-year grant, that might be enough to put on your resume so you can get a better job somewhere else. Also, don't get discouraged. Different networks, different people kind of have different job hiring approaches. And I noticed that it took me, like I said, I think like 40 applications to get an interview because I was throwing it in everywhere. But I never gave up until I got that position. And then once you get in, it's easy to get the experience, get the training, and kind of be able to talk the lingo a little more coming from a different sector. So those would be kind of my points if you want to get into local level emergency management.
Yeah, and just to also echo the point about networking and leveraging existing internships, I was interning at the Biden Institute at the University of Delaware, and we had a speaker from United Way Worldwide come in, and she was there to like talk about something totally not related to disaster, but just stayed in touch with her afterwards. And my spouse is in the Air Force, and I didn't know where I was going to be moving, which made job searching really difficult. But I happened to share, she asked for my resume, I shared my resume, and she just said, like, what are your interests? So of course I put, my research with Dr. Siders, and she was like, okay, let's meet. And long story short, essentially the organization had this project on the back burner that was being grant funded, and they were looking to create a position that could execute said project. And so the timing worked out really well. But of course, I didn't go into that interaction knowing that they had this project, that it was disaster focused. So I would just emphasize staying open, even maybe with organizations who aren't necessarily disaster focused. And there was something else I was going to say as well. Oh, I just want to echo too, because I feel like Annie mentioned it, Josh mentioned it. obviously everyone's circumstances are totally different, but a lot of times you might be considering geographically where you're looking to move or establish a career. And so I just always encourage people to consider their own circumstances. Maybe someone is interested in going wherever, maybe you want to stay close to your family, but obviously choose whatever is right for you, because a support system is super important, I feel like, in this area of work. So just want to add that as well.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so we have a question here from Erin that is directed towards Annie, and Erin is wondering if you could talk more about NHMA and the Emerging Leaders Committee.
Sure. So NHMA is the National Hazard Mitigation Association. We've been around since about 2008. Our executive operations director is named Ed Hecker. He was the SES Chief of Homeland Security and Contingency Ops for the Corps of Engineers during Hurricane Katrina and a variety of different. So we've got a outstanding leader right now. Our board primarily has a very interdisciplinary group of individuals ranging from state emergency managers, local emergency managers, floodplain managers, engineers, planners, etc. We're primarily funded by FEMA headquarters. So we're working right now with FEMA and the Emergency Management Institute to develop a hazard mitigation practitioner curriculum. So it's to be deployed very similar to the CEM or the CFM certifications that are out there. But we started a few years ago because of our concern with the workforce. We created an emerging leaders group. It's for either recent grads or current students in various disaster programs across the US. Our current emerging leaders chair, her name is Grace Olenzak, and she graduated from GW with her master's degree in disaster focused space, and she leads the group, and she also has a voting seat on our board. The intent is we bring on different individuals to that group, and they can help support different projects. Last year, their project, they helped us plan the practitioners workshop that was right after the Natural Hazard Center workshop in Boulder, Colorado. We have a partnership with the NHC. I'm on their advisory board. So it's just a really good opportunity to get exposure to the more hazard mitigation and resilience side of this space. And we bridge into a lot of other disciplines and lots of projects going on. So if you're looking for something to just get involved, we can use you. We also have interns. All of our interns have found immediate employment after leaving their internship because they're getting connected with some serious subject matter experts. We've got past state directors on our board, just some very well-connected people. So if you're interested in getting involved with us, please reach out. I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn or email. I'm always happy to help get people connected.
Great, thank you so much. Okay. I see that Steve asked a question here that got a really great response from Ashley, but I'll just kind of summarize, and then if anyone has any other thoughts, they can add that too. But Steve asked, what are some ways for someone who's been in an adjacent field, such as meteorology for a few years, and wanting to get back in the loop with EM and potentially transition back into the field? So Ashley was really emphasizing the importance of meteorology in EM, and that lots of people tend to be hiring for that. But yeah, I'm just wondering if anyone had any other thoughts on that. It's okay if not too.
I would agree with Ashley. It's like an extremely, I would say, cherished background for emergency management. So I would rather hire somebody with a meteorological background than, a pure emergency management degree or a public safety, first responder background. I'd much rather hire a meteorologist to help. And a lot of what we do and what we're doing as a profession is demonstrating value. So for us at the university level, like I kind of mentioned before, a lot of our leadership don't know what emergency management is. They think we're first responders or whatever. And one easy way for us to demonstrate value is through those weather products, through interpreting forecast models, and then networking with the National Weather Service and stuff like that. So that would be a very cherished like skill set for me if I was hiring like an entry level person or a mid career person.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of a follow-up to if we're talking about, a variety of experiences and whatnot. James is asking, is there any stigma in job hopping in the emergency management realm in order to broaden your realm of knowledge and responsibility? If anyone has any thoughts on that, I know we're already getting a few responses in the chat as well.
I would say no. I would say that's just a very normal, part of working. In general, it's pretty uncommon, I think, in a lot of fields. You're not seeing like our parents' generation or grandparents' generation where you get into a job and you just stay there for 30 years and retire. And the same, is true in emergency management. So get a an entry level job, get the experience you want. If there aren't opportunities to promote or to move up there, feel free to move to different agencies, build your network. It's very common. You see it all the way up through FEMA administrators down to the local level.
Do maybe want to just make sure that if you are job hopping, that you're doing it for the right reason, though, and just acknowledge that the grass is not always greener on the other side if you're unhappy with something. So determine if you're job hopping because you're bored or why you're doing it. It's okay to job hop, absolutely. You can go look at my resume. I'm a absolute every 4 years or so I've done something else, but it's all been progressive. So I can explain that if I'm ever asked. But just keep that in mind. Just when I'm looking at resumes, if I see someone's been here for a year and here for a year and here for a year, then I'm gonna go, are they just gonna be with me for a year? Because I can't even train them up in a year before I just, push them on their way. But I don't think there's a stigma necessarily associated with it like there used to be.
Yeah, I was gonna say definitely don't stay somewhere that's not benefiting you. You're not getting training, you're not getting development, you're not getting mentorship, and it's not a good situation. And I had a couple of different mentees that I talked to that had a similar situation like that, and I always told them like it's not worth losing development and missing out on opportunities just because you're worried about a resume thing. You can always explain that in an interview, and eventually, even if that one place doesn't really necessarily cherish it, I'm sure another one will. I haven't really experienced any issues with that so far, especially if you're trying to progress and you're looking for promotion and training opportunities, like they said.
Wonderful. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, this doesn't answer the question, but I am just going to drop a resource in the chat. It's a link to United Way's job board that aggregates all of our local United Ways. And sometimes it kind of, again, depends on if there's a grant funded position, but if you use the keyword disaster, oftentimes that'll bring up disaster related positions. But I do just also want to call out that I want to say half of all 211s, which is a non-emergency phone line to get connected to social services, are run by local United Ways. So if you search that disaster word, a lot of 211 roles will also pop up. But I'll put the link in the chat. I was just going to add.
Great. That'd be very much appreciated. Wonderful. Yeah, so we have a few more minutes here. I think that it's probably about time that we could think about wrapping things up. If there's any other questions, you all can feel free to drop them in the chat. But otherwise, I would invite our panelists to just kind of give us any closing thoughts if you have them, or any other things you would like to plug. I see Ashley's dropping her social media and email, but yeah, any other closing thoughts from anyone or pressing things that you would like to say before we head off?
I would say you could tell like we're a very passionate group. Like our field is filled with passionate, people who want to help other people. And then we've all been in the position that you're in, getting an entry level position. So like the theme of the day is network. So if you're interested or if you have questions in one of our particular backgrounds or something like that, feel free to reach out or talk to us if you see us at a conference or a training or something like that, because we're all, very willing to help the entry level people who are coming up and who are just getting into the field.
Same. I think just feel free to reach out, and if you reach out to somebody and they don't reply back to you or they don't give you a good response, that's a them thing, not a you thing. And you didn't want to probably pursue that route anyways. So just use your resources, be, probably overly bold in your approaches on how you reach out. Don't be aggressive, just be polite. Most people are willing to have a conversation with you. I'm always willing to do a virtual coffee chat or something, or if you're in Oklahoma, reach out. Or if you see me at a conference, I was at IAEM earlier this week for like 24 hours and flew back home, but just network, and don't be afraid to meet new people and connect.
I think I would just say the field is rapidly growing. Like a lot of opportunities we haven't had over the past 10 years. And so keep an eye out for new opportunities. Keep an eye out on how you can bring something new to the table. And then also don't get discouraged, because I know when I was first trying to get an entry-level job, it took a little while. So never give up, reach out to people, network, and be excited to get into a really awesome field, which is EM.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, guys. We do have like one question here, the final hour. If anyone has any ideas, just to shout it out. But William just wanted to know if there were any certifications to grab in the field for entry-level candidates.
You can always go become a certified floodplain manager. That's something that would set you apart in the field. That's easier to get than a AEM or a CEM because you don't really need much experience to go get it. So it just depends on the state. That's about it. That's all I can think of.
I agree. I would say skip your AM if possible, if you're an entry level person, and just take the trainings and spend that time networking and building up your professional network. CMs come up a lot. Obviously, I throw it onto my title. And sometimes you'll see it for like director level positions or something like that. But I would focus on that more when you have an organization to pay for it versus trying to get it or pay for it yourself. When honestly, it would be better to like have a cup of coffee or have a beer with somebody, in my opinion.
The only thing I could think of that no one talked about was some of the continuity programs. They have some private sector continuity that might be decent. Other than that, they're right. I mean, CEM, you have to have experience. State, you have to have experience. I think that's just about it.
I might toss out, there is a program called, I think it's Envision, it's ENV space SP, and it's for resilience and sustainability. A lot of engineers have it, a lot of planners, but it's also geared at emergency management, any type of interdisciplinary background. And you can take the training courses at your own pace and then take an exam and get your ENVSP. And that's really good for resilience or planning or mitigation types of jobs if you're interested in that route.
It's not a certification, but again, speaking to some roles I've seen at disaster-related nonprofit organizations, they look for people with experience managing programs, grant programs, that can look like a lot of different things, but just want to put that on your radar because a lot of times you end up being project manager. So if there's something you can do now that maybe is in a different setting, it's transferable, but I'd highly recommend also being open to positions that look for project managers.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been super insightful and really just a wonderful time talking with you all. And we really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to share these things with us. And yeah, once again, we can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge and being here. So thanks again. A virtual round of applause for everyone that was here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.